And so to continue with our early afternoon session on looking at government resources and projects and processes, we have another panel joining us, John Witty from the House Whistleblower Ombuds Office, the VA Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection, Ted Radway, and Jared Smith and Howard R. from the Fraud Investigation Unit at the Government Accountability Office. And I think it's really important that we have our government officials join us because they can really explain and clarify some of the things that are going on with these government processes and procedures and things sometimes that seem confusing, that leave us very frustrated. But on the other hand, you know, there are these folks that are really trying to do the right thing, do good work. I think the policies and the procedures that bind them are maybe sometimes confusing and frustrating to them as well. I don't want to speak for them, but I can only imagine that trying to put on my government hat, that these are not easy positions to be in either. And I think there's a lot of good work to be done. And if we can cooperate with each other, understand each other better, we can make these systems and processes work out as well. So because John Witty is an old friend and has been a good supporter for us, I'm going to turn over here. He looks like he's busy pulling up slides.
Yes, thank you.
And I'm going to let you kick us off.
Well, thank you very much, Jackie. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm John Witty. I'm the Deputy Director of Operations with the House Office of the Whistleblower Ombuds. So, and I'll mention that our team is a very tiny little team, so I can tell you all about the whole crew. Our director, who's not with us, is Shannon Devine, not here today. We also have another Deputy Director, Becca Jones, and then we have a Member and Committee Relations Manager, Charmise Jackson, and that's our entirety of our office. So what we are is an independent, nonpartisan support office for the House of Representatives to help them when they're working with whistleblowers. And I'd like to point out for the whistleblowers in the group here, there's a lot of you here, I know a lot of your faces. Thank you for your courage in coming forward and providing the information that both, you know, law enforcement, the executive branch, the legislative branch needs to do its job properly. We rely on you and your information, and yet all the risk of the consequences and the blowback falls on you and your family. And that's a point that Jackie, you know, has made, and I just wanted to reinforce our thanks, society's thanks for the work that you do. Our mission there is to make sure that congressional staffers in the House are working safely and effectively with you, the whistleblower, so that they're maximizing your impact of what you're bringing forward, and at the same time trying to help mitigate those risks that I was just mentioning. So our vision is to institutionalize these best practices throughout the whole House, right? The House of Representatives, 441 member delegate and commission offices, 20 standing committees with majority minority staff. We want to institutionalize these best practices so that whenever a whistleblower comes forward to Congress, they get these best practices for most effective action. And this is an important thing for Congress, right? Congress relies on this information. And last year, 2/3 of all of those offices that I just listed off, they actually engaged our office for some kind of training or consultation or use of our resources to help you and your fellow whistleblowers. This is the point being that Congress is integral to working with, to solving these problems and working with you. But having said that, you have to remember that they have immense discretion about what they can do. There's no guarantee of what Congress is going to do or what they can, in fact, do. So So for anyone considering the path of whistleblowing, one of the first bits of advice, which we've heard already today one time, is, is to make a plan. And one of those parts of that plan might be to do some research for some experienced legal counsel. And I do want to just finish by saying that we do have, we're not an intake office, but we do have a bunch of resources on our website. So I lost it all my notes. We do have a bunch of publicly available resources on our website, including things like these whistleblower survival tips, which I'll leave here. That's a one-page sheet. And another one of ours is a thing called Best Practices for Working with Congress, okay? And that's specifically tuned for the way we approach our job. And related to a conversation that was this morning, where there was a lot of talk from the lawyers earlier this morning about the state laws. Remember that? So one of the resources that we have on our website is we have a survey of state statutes that might be applicable in the whistleblower arena that we commission and refresh every year by the Congressional Research Service. They're part of one of our resources. So on our website, you'll find a survey of state whistleblower statutes compiled there by state. And it's the kind of thing that may be a useful resource for you as you're searching for your path forward. So I think with that, I'll pass the mic.
Good afternoon. My name is Ted Radway. I'm the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for the VA's Office of Whistleblower Protection, Accountability and Whistleblower Protection. I want to thank Whistleblowers of America for having me here today. Standard government disclaimer that any opinions I give are not necessarily those of my office or the VA. The Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection, or OAWP, I just wanted to talk to you a little about what we do. We were established by executive order back in 2017, and then by statute two months later with the passage of the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act 2017. We're unique in federal agencies as being a quasi-independent oversight entity that's housed within the agency that it oversees. We're led by a presidentially appointed, Senate-confirmed Assistant Secretary who reports directly to the VA Secretary. Our mission is to serve veterans, employees, and other stakeholders by protecting whistleblowers and fostering individual and organizational accountability across the VA. We accomplish this mission through a number of functions, including providing advice, reports, and recommendations to the Secretary on all matters related to accountability, providing training on whistleblower rights, protections, and retaliation, receiving whistleblower disclosures, conducting unbiased investigations into alleged senior leader misconduct, as well as whistleblower retaliation by any VA supervisor, doing independent performance reviews to improve compliance and effectiveness of VA programs, and evaluate the whistleblower reporting environment at VA facilities, among other things. Now, if you've been in the whistleblower arena for a few years, you may be familiar with the 2019 IG report on OAWP that found serious concerning deficiencies in the way that the office operated. When I applied for a job there and I Googled it, that was the first thing that came up was that IG report, which gave me a lot of pause. Happy to say that although that was a damning report, I'm happy to say that the OAWP of today is nothing like the OAWP of 2019. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. We've more than doubled in size, hiring experienced professional staff. We've expanded our functions to more fully implement and operationalize the Accountability Act. In fiscal 21, we received 2,060 matters into our hotline. These are allegations of whistleblower retaliation, senior leader misconduct, and other whistleblower disclosures like violations of law, rule, or regulation, abuse of authority, gross mismanagement, gross waste of funds, and substantial and specific dangers to public health or safety. In fiscal year 24 to date, 3 years later, we've received over 3,078 matters, a 50% increase that we believe reflects the growing trust that VA employees have in our office. When matters come in as prescribed by statute, if the allegations involve senior leader misconduct or whistleblower retaliation, we investigate that matter ourselves. If it involves other whistleblower disclosures, such as abuse of authority or violations of law and regulations by a non-senior leader, We refer that back out to the field for a monitored investigation, or we refer it to the IG or the Office of Medical Inspector if it falls within their jurisdiction. A note on confidentiality: by statute, we protect the confidentiality and identity of whistleblowers. We only disclose it if they give their consent or were required by some other federal law to do so. Last year, 35% of our complainants chose to remain anonymous, 65% chose to disclose their identity. And we do have a really great portal that we set up that allows you to file something anonymously and still track the progress of your complaint as it goes forward. In fiscal 21, on average, our investigations took 251 days to close. And for investigations resulting in a report of investigation, which are the more complex investigations, it took an average of 496 days to close. Move forward 3 years, contrast that with fiscal year 24 to date. The average investigation is closed in 55 days, and investigations resulting in a report of investigation are closed in 122 days, 75% decrease in time in just 3 years. When OAWP finds misconduct or whistleblower retaliation, we typically make a recommendation for disciplinary action. In cases of whistleblower retaliation, Congress, you heard OFC talk about this, the 3-day suspension. Congress was so concerned about retaliation in the VA, they gave us our own statute, which is a mandatory minimum 12-day suspension for a first offense. So when we find whistleblower retaliation, we don't look at the Douglas factors, which are aggravating and mitigating factors that a supervisor has to look at. We recommend a 12-day suspension. In fiscal 20, only 68% of our disciplinary recommendations were being implemented by management, or the subject official resigned or retired prior to discipline being effective. In contrast, last fiscal year, 100% of our disciplinary recommendations were taken in some form by management, or the official retired or resigned before discipline could be taken. In fiscal year 24 to date, although we've doubled the number of disciplinary recommendations from last year, in only one case where we recommended disciplinary action and did management take no action whatsoever. And that was the case where OSC actually found PPP and we agreed with them. We also make non-disciplinary recommendations, which can be corrective action for the whistleblower, training for minor policy violations, or recommendations to create or modify policies. This fiscal year to date, we've made 79 non-disciplinary recommendations, 19 are still open, but of the remaining 55, all but 3 were implemented, plus 1 retirement. These successes over the past few years, we think, are due to several factors. We've hired more experienced investigators. We've instituted standard operating procedures and policies. We've done regular investigator training, and we conduct investigations according to city standards, Council on Inspectors General of Integrity and Efficiencies. We've created and staffed the Investigative Attorneys Division to help properly scope investigations and ensure our reports are legally sound. This ensures independence from VA's Office of General Counsel, which is no longer involved in any of our investigations. All of this has helped us dramatically cut down the time it takes to do investigations and to issue better recommendations, which are nearly all being acted upon, all while seeing a 50% increase in the number of matters coming in the door. We've also created a whistleblower navigator position to help people understand who has what jurisdiction and where they can find help or relief at the VA. This fiscal year, the navigators answered over 900 calls for assistance and guidance. In addition to being responsible for training all 450,000 or so VA employees, the training they take in whistleblower rights and protections. This year to date, we trained over 20,000 senior leaders, supervisors, and employees in live training sessions. And we've taken substantial steps to operationalize other parts of our statute beyond just the investigations. For example, we've begun conducting climate reviews, which are non-investigatory reviews, typically involving all employee surveys, site visits, interviews with leadership, employees, unions, and others, to seek to examine the reporting environment at a given VA facility, asking the question, do employees feel they can report alleged wrongdoing without fear or retaliation? We've begun program reviews to, among other things, determine if recommendations by oversight entities such as OIG and GAO remain implemented, if they address the root cause of an identified problem rather than just a band-aid to close out a recommendation, and if they have a solution that corrected a problem identified by another oversight entity, is that solution scalable to the rest of the VA? We recently produced for the Secretary our 8th and final report on military sexual trauma, where we made over 24 recommendations, all of which have been implemented or concurred with by DHA and VBA are in the process of being implemented. That's kind of a brief overview of our office, and I look forward to any questions.
All right, good afternoon. Appreciate the opportunity to be here to speak to you, and as Ed and John indicated, your courage to come forward. I'm Howard Arp. I'm Director of Investigations at the Government Accountability Office. I've been in federal law enforcement for almost 25 years. Spent my entire career working with sources of information, whether that was a confidential source that was giving us information related to narcotics smuggling, all the way to working with whistleblowers who have internal knowledge about wrongdoing at government agencies. The GAO, as most of y'all are aware, we provide Congress with reports that are unbiased, nonpartisan, fact-based reports on how our government is operating its programs and how effective those are. Our work is always done at the request of congressional committees or subcommittees, or as is required statutorily by public law. Within GAO, we maintain what's called the FraudNet hotline. FraudNet falls under my purview. It is it's called online. You can call it an 800 number. You can mail us complaints. If you have a fax machine, you can fax us complaints. We do still receive all modes of communication. And FraudNet is really more of a portal to receive information and help the individuals making those complaints get that information to the right entity. GAO ourselves do not investigate individual complaints of whistleblower retaliation or even whistleblower, the subject issue. But we do help those individuals get that information to the appropriate authorities, and then we document the information. It is very helpful to our internal work at GAO to understand the issues that you all are reporting on whenever we go in to review those programs. If we already have sort of an insight as to, hey, this is an area that we're aware may be a problem, it helps us design our work in a fashion to help really address that and determine, is this a systemic matter that needs a broader look at it and recommendations potentially to help that agency be more effective and more efficient. Whenever you're submitting complaints to FraudNet, similar as was mentioned, there's confidentiality that we honor, and it's up to the source to determine what level of confidentiality you want. So we have standard confidential complaints and anonymous complaints. Under the standard complaints, you're able to make a complaint to GAO, and in that scenario, you're essentially telling us that you have no problem with us disclosing your information to the appropriate authority, and so we usually make that referral immediately to that authority and without any redactions or changes to any information. If you indicate you want to be confidential, but you have disclosed to us who you are, we will reach out to you to ask if you are okay with us sharing your information. If you are not, we will redact that information out. We like to have that conversation before we make any referrals. We want to make sure we're honoring and protecting your ability to remain confidential. And then the final one is anonymous complaints, and we don't have a system yet to be able to communicate back and forth. And so for anonymous complaints, we ask people to be as descriptive and provide as much information and detail as possible, so that whenever we make that referral to the appropriate agency, they have enough information to potentially act on that. Because if it's a very vague report, doesn't have a lot of information or details, the likelihood of any action being taken as a result of that particular allegation or complaint are fairly limited. We also, FraudNet, we also support congressional investigations and inquiries when asked to do so. It's not a very frequent scenario for us. And I indicated that, because we maintain this database of complaints, GAO is regularly, we issue, I want to say, thousands of reports a year. And so at any point in time, whenever a complaint comes in, my staff, part of their job is to canvass our agency to determine, is there any ongoing work right now related to this issue? If so, we can make those teams aware of that information. Or whenever our teams begin new work, they contact FraudNet directly to say, hey, do you have anything related to this agency program already in your database that we need to be aware of? So we have a very proactive measure to be able to share information internally and help our teams understand some of the issues that are being reported. I think it's important to note from the Whistleblower Protection Act, we talk about protected disclosures, and the broader Whistleblower Protection Act as it pertains to federal employees. I want to make sure people understand GAO was not actually listed as an entity to receive a protected disclosure. It's not to say people can't submit their information to us and we will help you and work with you to get it to the appropriate authority, but GAO is not an entity for which a protected disclosure can be made. I think it's supervisors, Congress, the IG, OSC. There are a number of entities that are specifically listed. Now, the National Defense Authorization Act of FY 2013 did include GAO as an entity to receive protected disclosures from federal contractors and grantees. And so as a result of that, we can receive disclosures directly on those matters. I'll say again, we still, as we don't investigate those issues, we didn't make the referrals, but the disclosure to GAO in that scenario is a protected disclosure on the face of it. As I mentioned, FraudNet is here to help whistleblowers get their information and get it to the right entities. We have our website, gao.gov/fraudnet. So it's very easy to get to report there. That's where we prefer reports to come to, because that then goes straight into our case management system. But if that's not an option, or if it's too funky for you, or you just don't like working with computers, you can always call us, send an email, fraud@gao.gov is our email address. There's an 800 number and fax number, and all that's on our website as well. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague here, Jared Smith. Jared's done a lot of work really looking at fraud writ large. Congress was very interested in, throughout many years now, in understanding what is the extent of the problem of fraud. And it is something that is very large, as Jared will get to, but as a result of that, there's plenty of opportunities for whistleblowers to potentially identify these issues. And I think a lot of times some whistleblowers think, well, my information isn't really all that, it's not that big of a deal. Or it's not that big of an issue. Big to me, but maybe it's not that big of a deal in the bigger picture. And as Jared will explain to you, the bigger picture is very significant, and any information we can receive is important.
Thank you for that introduction, Howard. So, as Howard mentioned, I work at the General Accountability Office, and I serve as the chief statistician and do a lot of work in fraud and improper payments. And what I want to talk to you about today is about the extent of fraud and the importance of a proactive approach by folks in the government, outside the government, looking out for areas where the government can prove it and report it. And so, for context, I think most of you might be aware of this, but for those who aren't, there's different ways that the government provides internal oversight of itself, right? There's whistleblowers reporting, but it also has functions like audit functions that are sort of set out to look for ways to improve within the government. GAO has such a function. Folks go out and look at government agencies and look for areas where they could improve and make recommendations to those agencies. And a lot of the information that's important that we get, are from, the interviews and the feedback we get from the government staff, and we rely on them on being forthright, right? Because if agencies have issues and they attempt to hide those issues, our ability, the audit side to pierce through that is sometimes limited given the scope of the agency. So the importance of folks feel open to convey the real problems that are out there, so we can make real recommendations and see improvements. And then obviously, let's have those investigations, right? And as I know you all are aware, investigations are driven critically by tips and complaints and whistleblowing. There's a lot of talk about data analytics. I'm involved in data analytics, but data analytics won't get you so far, right? Especially when the issues are, with the dynamics of the program or some internal operation. You need people who are willing to speak out about the limitations, right? And speak openly. So the work that Howard mentioned that we've been doing, this is about the extent of fraud, right? So how big is the problem of fraud? And of course, it's really hard to give an accurate assessment of that, right? Because when people commit fraud, they don't email an IG and be like, hey, by the way, just for your accounting purposes, I'm going to commit about $2,000 worth of fraud or $10,000 worth of fraud, right? It's the opposite, right? Fraudsters are doing everything they can to lie and deceive and hide that information. And in fact, the government has all sorts of oversight entities, right? But the fraudsters often know what that oversight is and they attempt to bypass it. And that's one of the reasons why whistleblowing is so important, right? To take someone from the inside to look and say, wait, this person is not following, the protocols of stealing from the taxpayers. So we did an effort at the request of Congress where we looked at a lot of the evidence, and some of that evidence was cases, right? Investigative cases, and results of those cases, and investigations. But another key element was hotline complaints, right? Because since most fraud isn't caught, we had to look at information based on like sort of the initial sort of complaints that the agency receives, and then use that along with information that we had about the percent of those that are investigated and what happens to those that are investigated, and then accounting for the fact that the average complaint that's not investigated might not be served. There's a lot of math underneath it, but we used that to create a model and estimated this was 2018 to 2022 time period. There's roughly 200 to 500 billion in fraud across the. Now, some of that is from the pandemic period, but some of it's outside of the pandemic period. And these are really large numbers, right? And the government spends a lot of effort on oversight, and that those oversight efforts themselves don't always work, right? And can cause problems, right? And this is, it's sort of a game, right? We're spending lots of money, and in spending lots of money, we need to make sure that money is protected, but we also need to make sure that protections don't get in the way of the people who need the money. And it's a very difficult balance. And the people who are involved in the program speaking out when problems arise becomes absolutely critical. Other estimation work that that we did emphasizing how big a deal fraud can be is with the unemployment insurance program during the pandemic. The government had to get the money out. It was absolutely critical, right? If you all remember at the start of the pandemic, it was bipartisan matter. But then in getting the money out so quickly, the infrastructure wasn't there to do that in a way that it was protected. And we sampled claims, reviewed carefully, data about the claims and the case files, and found an estimated over $100 billion was stolen, right? And that's money that could be going to people in need, right? But instead it's going to fraudsters. So that's just another example of the large magnitude of fraud and the importance, again, of people being able to feel free that when they have a problem. That's why things like this are so important, right? And providing that safety, that structure for folks, that they're having problems and they can reach out to and hear about other people's stories and say, yeah, this is something that I can do. Because it's only with that sort of combined effort we can sort of save those the hundreds of billions of dollars that are currently being lost. And beyond the fraud, I think it's critically important as well as just the operations of the government, right? It's always recovering the government. Sometimes it's about a program that's not serving its beneficiaries the way it should be. And it's the best way that the government can hear about that and then make recommendations and to improve those steps. So that was the piece that I wanted to say.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions, comments? Oh yeah, I had a feeling.
Well, I'm trying to recall a specific site because I've been a whistleblower for 30+ years. So I did this stuff too. I was a whistleblower in the pump engine for 30 years, but putting nuclear weapon material, so pretty serious stuff. And I prevailed 8 times, and my whistleblower disclosures have never been resolved because the attorneys being attorneys, similarly the attorneys for the Catholic Church, are trying to protect their client, regardless of what happens to everybody else. The Comptroller General, by my view, has a statutory duty to make a report, which is never made. And I think, I'm trying to recall the exact words, and I can give it to you later, but no one asked the question after 9/11. Was the failure to protect whistleblowers a factor in 9/11, or the economic meltdown, or going to war in Iraq for false reasons, or on and on and on. And I think the Comptroller General might have the ability to ask that question. And if he hasn't Asked that question, made the point.
Yeah, that'd be an issue for a general counsel to find on under statutory authority. It's beyond my area of expertise.
All right, I'm just throwing it out there.
Any other questions? Oh. Surprise.
Thanks. I have a couple questions for Mr. Radway. The first one is that your presentation was just chock full of significant research, and I'm wondering, is it on the OAWP website, or have you given it to Glover their proceedings here so that we can study it? So I've got a second question. I thought the second question now to the mic there. How many people have been suspended, and how many people have been lost their jobs under the Kirkpatrick Act?
So there are some statistics on our website. We're actually looking at, there's current year and prior fiscal year statistics that I mentioned. Some of those are up there. We're looking at putting more things on our website, including summaries of our substantiated cases and otherwise summaries. We think that would serve a deterrent and educational factor. In terms of how many have been suspended or removed under the Kirkpatrick Act, I don't have those numbers. We would only have numbers of people that are disciplined pursuant to recommendations that our office makes. A lot of other suspensions or removals happen because of actions that, for example, VHA takes on its own in the health system that don't come to us, mostly non-senior leaders, for example. But I don't have those sometimes.
All right, thank you. Anybody? Oh, yeah.
I don't, can somebody maybe explain to me how the judgment fund works? I've gone on the site and looked at, the agencies and what they were, whatever the judgment was, the type of wrongdoing, but who pays it? How is the agency required a judgment fund back? How long? Somebody can explain how it works. It's just a huge mystery to me.
I'm not familiar with it, so
See?
Sorry.
No, Tiffany, I don't know if you heard me say earlier when we were talking about OC, this is one of those, it exists in statute. We know that the fund is there. We know that agencies have an ability to make this fine, and I think it caps at $1,000, so it's not even a big fine. And that's been one of the, it came up this week that even on the Senate side, they weren't really able to answer, so what is this judgment fund and where's the money? So we may ask for a GAO report on what is this fund and where is this money?
It's the IRS. There's a long list of agencies that date the wrongdoing, this issue, the amount of money that the whistleblower or the deal that they were awarded, and maybe dates that you can see closed. But yeah, I think there's even GAO.
Does the IRS, though, it keeps the money it collects, or does it return it to the treasury? Where does the IRS money go?
I used to know the answer to that question, but it's not, I don't know it enough to say, my answer is it's funds go to treasury, right? And it's not,
Right.
it's like, I'm trying to think if it's in the OMB published data as a revenue line, but it's probably mixed together with a lot of other stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's been too long since I did that.
And just where I'm coming from is if a whistleblower is, let's say, in the midst of settlement, they may want to look at all of the other similar cases, or different cases that that agency has been settled or confined, to just get a sense of where they may lie. So I not really useful, but the question again is where's the money, who's paying it, is the agency eventually have to pay it? I'm gonna take it.
Good. We can dig into it together. I want to know the answer to that question too.
And connecting to, but I don't know, but the way almost all GAO reports are by request of Congress, and some of those are because there's enough institutions that have sort of effectively requested a member, you know, people get interested, if Congress is interested in a topic, then they can request the work of that Congress. And that's one of the most common ways that we do look into something is our critical mass of folks are interested, and Congressman sees the interest of the public on it, and then puts in the request, and then these are told, you know, we independently sort of look at the topic and pursue it. But that's by far the largest driver of our work. I think over 90% of our work is with sort of requests.
From Congress.
Yeah.
Yeah, we met with Senator Grassley's staff yesterday from the committee, and they were taking copious notes because they couldn't answer this question.
Right. And that's what, you know, Senator Grassley working with the specifically committees is on, but if the committee chair or ranking member, you know, writes us a letter, then that kicks off a process that leads to us doing a report. You know, not just doing like doing waste or whatever. There's congressional interest, and that's what drives the topic. People in Congress and government means to look at public expressing to the
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I just wanted to make an addendum about our office's resources that are available for the whistleblower community. We're not an intake office, but we get a lot of interest from the whistleblower community because of our office's name. And so we've made a commitment to helping orient whistleblowers to the landscape around them, and it's publicly available on our website. And I pointed out a couple of the resources that we have, but in addition, we have specific fact sheets that are related typically to the sector of where the whistleblowing is oriented to. Is it a federal employee? Is it private sector? Those kind of things. And I mentioned the state resources that we have. The other thing that we have is a list of referral options that might be valuable to a whistleblower, including things like the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Accountability and Whistleblower Protection. You'll find, you know, links to them on our website, and to GAO's FraudNet as well. This whole universe is interconnected of how to make it impact while protecting yourself. And so exploring the universe is a key element of your journey, or your, you know, and that's where one of the resources, the umbrella resources that you could use is the resources we've compiled on our website. I want to make that point. Thank you, Chad.
All right. So I appreciate it. I thank you all so much for being here. I know everybody is busy. The government is always running around with all kinds of things and projects and people to see and do. So I do appreciate you taking your time out of your very, very busy schedules to be here and to assist us with understanding these missions and the purpose. I think we're all really working for the best interest, for the greater good of our country. He was talking earlier about John Burnett, and I keep thinking about, he kept saying that he really just was worried about the flying public. And I think if you check out the words flying, we all share, I think, a same common goal about protecting the greater good and the general public. So thank you all for being here. We are about to get ready for our break. You'll get about 15-20 minutes of a break.